as we possibly can. So first of all, I'm going to come to Bjorn Vang Jensen, who's EVP, Global Head of Ocean at Easy Speed International Logistics. So Bjorn, maybe you can let us know a little bit about your background and your role, and then share some of your perspectives with us.
Sure. I don't know if this is on. Is it on?
Yep.
It's on. Hi, I'm Bjorn. I'm here I'm not sure which capacity I'm in here as, because I'm a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper turned poacher turned gamekeeper. I've spent more years than I care to admit, but well over 30 years building, managing, and attempting to design global supply chains in various roles. I've been a carrier, I've been a freight forwarder, then I became a 3PL, turned my hand completely to the non-transport related side of supply chain, working with Excel, which we now know as DHL Global Supply Chain, then worked with TNT Logistics, that we now know as SIVA. Then I switched over on the other side of the fence and became a shipper for 15 years. I built and managed the global logistics function with Electrolux. Decided I was old enough and clearly had enough gray hair to call myself a consultant. Switched and did that for Sea Intelligence Advisory Services out of Copenhagen for a few years during the pandemic times. Put my BCO hat back on, joined Cummins, the engine manufacturer, as global head of logistics or head of global logistics. And now have come back to my roots as freight forwarder, joining a company called Easy Speed Global International. But doing very much the same. What I try to do in my life is marry all those experiences into something that our customers find different from your traditional one-trick pony. I'm either a forwarder or I'm a BCO or whatever. I'm in the happy position of being able to don whatever hat fits the moment. And that's what I intend to do today. I'm based in Dubai. I've been there for a couple of years. That was my 9th country. Spent a lot of time in Asia as well, and in the US. Look forward to today.
Thanks, Bjorn, for the introduction. A couple of areas. We've got plenty of time, so let's delve a little bit more deeply into your varied past. I was going to say checkered, but let's stick with varied, shall we?
You can say checkered. Everybody else does.
Electrolux and Cummins, obviously two global brands. How do you think they are dealing with the present tariffs and the trade war environment we find ourselves in at the moment? Or if you were back there, how would you be dealing with it?
So the present problems are not so much logistical as they are regulatory and legal and customs related. You can argue very forcefully that customs is a big component of the global supply chain, but it's, as usual, almost, I almost said logisticians are the ones left to deal with the fallout of it. And arguably in the current environment have the easier job. Because all you got to do is arrange some transport. And let's be honest about it, that's fixable with money. I don't mean to be crude about it, but you know, as much as we moan and groan about the current freight rates, there was a time just a few years ago when a lot of us paid double those freight rates, and yet we're still here, right? We can fix this problem. Logistically, we can fix it. But the regulatory component is, I think, the thing that will cause many more gray hairs in Electrolux and Cummins than even I have. The two companies approached it very differently. Electrolux tended to outsource the management and the planning. Cummins had, perhaps suitable for an American company, hundreds and hundreds of lawyers engaged in-house on dealing with this. It will be causing them tremendous amounts of gray hair because these people are very good at what they do when they're told what they have to solve for, right? They're professionals. They know how to solve for this. I need to bring in this, and I need to do it as cheaply as possible. I need to take advantage of as many of the exceptions and loopholes as I can find. And they do that very, very well. So do the outsourced service providers. But right now, they're dealing with an environment when they don't know what the regulations are. They don't know what the loopholes are. They don't know what the exceptions are. And when they do finally get to the point where they know what those exceptions and loopholes and rules are, they've changed because somebody's cheeseburger arrived late this morning and got him in a bad mood. I don't envy these people this job, but I would argue, maybe controversially, that the logisticians have the easiest job of them all because it is fixable with money and not as much of it as it took to fix Corona.
Okay, and you're based in Dubai at the moment.
I am.
So how is Dubai and the Gulf dealing with or coping with the present sort of instability amongst its neighbors?
By giving free airplanes to the United States and generally trying to be on good terms. I mean, the Middle East has escaped relatively unscathed, right? Let's not turn this into a geopolitical forum because when we're dealing with the Middle East, that could take the rest of the afternoon. But they are dealing with it by keeping a very low profile, by not drawing any attention to themselves other than attention that gives them a favorable view. I think there are parts of the Middle East that are seeing opportunity here. And here I'm not just talking about the finance, we're not talking about the gilded Gulf states and Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi. Actually, I'm thinking a little bit about Saudi and Jordan, who have all of a sudden become very interesting to a lot of garment manufacturers, for example. So the whole of East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, arguably also Ethiopia, as well as Jordan, are actually very large garment manufacturing countries in their own right. And they are picking up a lot of business from China, both business that other companies have moved from China to these countries, but also companies that China has moved from China to these countries. And so it behooves all of these states to keep the lowest possible profile if they don't have a spare plane to give away. And they do. So low profile is what they do.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. Let's move to Peter. Let me try. You can have a good laugh at my pronunciation. Peter Sundara Swamikanu.
Well done, mate. Well done.
Hey, well, that's great. Obviously, you have an Asian and Pacific perspective on this, so over to you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Peter Sundra. I'm from Singapore, born and bred there. Just like Bjorn, he's got white hairs. I'm losing hair. That's the only difference. All right. I've gone through the 3 cycles, as what we call it in the logistics. I've worked in a shipping line for 10 years. Then I worked in a 3PL for another 10 years. Also worked for a digital freight forwarder, Flexport, for 2 years. Now I'm working for a direct shipper called VZ. VZ Industries is basically a packaging manufacturing company based out of Melbourne. We do paper, manufacture papers, manufacture glass bottles, wine bottles. Even though the corporate office is in Melbourne, the logistics center is in Singapore for many reasons, because Singapore is basically a hub for transshipment, hub for freight forwarding, hub for multi-country consolidation. So many of the freight forwarders are there, many of the shipping lines are there, many of the customers are there doing their procurement strategy. So I look after the global ocean freight for VZ, basically dealing day-to-day negotiation with the carriers, both pricing and space and operational challenges. At the same time, also look after the tender and pricing management team in Singapore. That's in a nutshell of my portfolio, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So in terms of Asia, obviously it's a region of opportunity, diversity, many of these words, but it's also a region of increasing geopolitical complexity. Would you agree with that sort of characterization?
I think I do agree with that characterization. Just to summarize the Asia supply chain scenario, many people will build bridges during uncertainty, but in Asia, in supply chain, we build bridges to connect with one another. If you hear the speech by Nigel, where you see the trade flows are basically expanding in non-US related trades. Intra-Asia is booming, Asia to India subcontinent is booming, Asia to Middle East Africa is booming, Asia to Europe is booming, and Asia to Latin America is moving. So therefore, the people in Asia, they're very, very prudent in what they want to do. They do not depend heavily on the US. Yes, US market is very important, but there are other markets where we can prosper and we can grow. And that is important the way we look at any form of disruptions in Asia. During COVID, many of us panicked because we have never faced such a situation where all the terminals, all the ports, infrastructure were totally paralyzed. Right? We panicked at that point in time. But for current situation, the US tariff, especially what Bjorn mentioned, it is not initiated by any operational or infrastructure challenges, purely due to policy-driven strategy. So therefore, we have to take a different approach. A couple of months ago, I attended a conference in Singapore called Logisim, and one of the questions posted to us was this. We have been asked to be reactive because, like what Bjorn mentioned, when policy comes through, we don't know how to react. But in our DNA as supply chain professionals, we never have ever been a reactive person. We always plan ahead. And Asia is good in that. Asia always plan ahead to come up with any form of disruption. How do we overcome this? And that's what's happening in Asia now. We do not stand still, but we look at different opportunities that are available for us to move our cargo. Even though I'm a BCO, I move a lot of cargoes out from Australia and New Zealand to the world, we also have some third-party cargoes. I'll give you an example, right? When the US imposed the tariff on China, and China also retaliated, especially in terms of meat, beef meats, what the Chinese did, Chinese basically say, okay, I'm not going to depend on the USA, I depend on Australia. So Australia benefited because Australia beef of high quality and sustainable, so therefore the trade between Australia and China increased. That's how the Chinese or any other people in Asia are looking at where we can get opportunities. Like what the speaker said this morning, Amy's mentioned, the word crisis provides us both opportunity and challenges, but in Asia, we take care of opportunity more and more.
And in terms, just bringing it back to the sort of the question or the headline from this session, which is strategies to achieve excellence in supply chain. How would you characterize it in very simply summarize?
Yeah. I think I'll characterize in simply 3 terms, right? We are heavily involved in multi-sourcing. We regionalized our supply chain. And more importantly, we tap the technology. I think these are the 3 main strategies we use in order to create ourselves a supply chain resilient nation and region.
Thank you. Let's come to you now, James. James Hookham, Director of the Global Shippers Forum. Your perspective is very much from shippers, obviously, manufacturers, retailers. We've had a couple, obviously, from our first session. So, but let's summarize the view of the market.
Well, thank you, John, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think there are 2 types of shipper in the world at the moment, in my experience. Those that are resident and established in the United States of America, and everyone else. Because clearly, the impact of the US trade policy at the moment is having most effect on shippers who are importing goods into the US. And the Global Shippers Forum, in its role of providing a network of shipper associations, a voice for the shipper in the global debate about international trade and logistics. GSF is doing its part to support its member in the US, the National Industrial Transportation League, to help American shippers through this current crisis, and it is a crisis in their eyes and in their experience. And then, of course, there's the backwash into the rest of the global trade community, not just because they, as exporters, are seeing a very significant part of their trade with the US under threat, but also because of the way that global logistics is so interconnected that they are seeing changes and consequences play out in their particular trade lanes and in their particular shipping connections. So although there are very localized effects of the tariff issue in the US and potentially still on other countries, the way that is affecting the scheduling of shipping services, the frequency, and of course the price and the surcharging and so on, the end cost, are of global impact. So just because you might not be involved in a US trade doesn't mean to say you're immune from the consequences here. So yes, the world is in a state of deep upheaval. It's not just a question, as Bjorn was saying and Peter was saying, that it's not just a question of coping with the usual day-to-day frictions. Right at the moment, it's a question of whether we trade at all. And that's been the overt policy of certainly the White House administration at the moment, an attempt to relocate manufacturing back into the US, and therefore, at a first level, basically saying we're turning our back on international trade and logistics. Now, that won't happen in totality, but that's quite a big change in political positioning in terms of what the objectives of the world's biggest economy are, to say, actually, we want to do it all ourselves as a first degree of approximation. So this is pretty big stuff. It's not just business as usual.
And I think in everything that we hear coming out of the US, what we seems to get lost is the voice of those who are saying that tariffs are obviously have a very major detrimental impact on imports in terms of the cost. I mean, I think there's the National Retail Federation, NRF, in the US. But when do you think that the impact will really be felt in terms of Walmart and Target and all those companies? Because I don't get the feeling that any sort of clear message is being relayed through the supply chain in terms of cost yet.
No. And that's because most of the tariffs, certainly for consumer goods, are paused until July the 9th. So ask me on the morning of July the 10th, I'll be able to answer. Yeah. And that's the problem, because no one actually knows what to do. So looking at the fascinating presentation you moderated this morning, John, the big growth in movements, container movements that we've experienced this year, I think are undoubtedly time-shifted movements in anticipation that there will be tariffs, and faced with the very limited number of choices that a shipper has got, then that's absolutely the right move. Yes, there may be a wonderful settlement in relations between the US and China and other countries, but there's a risk attached that it won't be, and it could be even worse. So whilst we are in a present lull, and all the messages I've been getting from US importers is get it in now, beat the deadline, beat the tariffs, and that's been showing through in the statistics and so on that you were sharing with everyone this morning. So it's been very transactional. It's been very short time window. Get it into country, get it into bond. So even though you don't actually import it and even pay the tariffs now, get it into the country so that you've got that contingency, you've got that possibility. And of course, the rest of the world is waiting for whatever agreements, trade deals, and so on. And speaking as a Brit here, clearly the UK took the lead, somewhat controversially in some cases, in trying to broker those kinds of deals. And therefore, in the next 3-4 weeks, we can hopefully expect to see further ones coming through. The mood music on China, at least as far as the president himself is concerned, was good. There seems prospect of an outcome. But to your point, it still leaves the jobbing shipper sitting at their terminal today. What do I do? Do I bring the goods in? Do I leave them sitting on the quay in the dock in the port of loading? And if I do decide to bring them in, have I got the warehousing capacity to hold them? Have I got the cash flow to support the added interest costs that I'm going to need to be paying on that? It's a big time for shippers to have to lean in and start to manage these big questions.
Perfect. Thank you, James. So let's come last but certainly not least to you, Pierre. You're Director of Multimodality at Haropa Port. So maybe just give a little bit about your background and the port, and then if you could address what excellence in the supply chain and the role of ports within that process that would be great.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Hello, everyone. So I'm Pierre de Bellabre. I'm in charge of multimodality at Haropa Port. Maybe, first of all, I should start to introduce what is Aropaport, because I'm quite sure you don't all know what is Aropaport. Aropaport is a port authority born from the merger of Port of Le Havre, which is a major TU's container port and a major gateway, Rouen, which is a cereal port, the first port in charge of the export of cereals in Western Europe, and it's also a river port. And Paris, because Paris also have a large diversity of ports. We have a logistic activity, but also a touristic activity. So when you go and walk along the riverside in Paris, actually you are walking on Aropaport estate. So we have a quite mixed activity. And so we have the specificity to be a kind of corridor port, mixing maritime activity and river activity. Regarding myself, so I was a consultant. I come from a consulting firm, and I joined Aropaport about 1 year ago. So I got this good idea to move from consulting firm to a client, thinking I would be less busy, but actually not the case. And so I'm in charge of multimodality. How we define multimodality? It's quite easy to understand. The idea is to have a better balanced modal split between road, rail, river. And it's especially the case for Aropaport, since we have quite a high level of road transport, inland transport, and we try to rebalance this, and it's a quite important matter for us. Why is it an important matter? Because it's, of course, a factor of attractiveness. We don't operate. We are not a cargo owner. We don't operate train lines. We are not a freight forwarder, but we manage an estate, and we need to make traffic come, because most of our revenue comes from our landlord activity and from sea traffics. So if we want to keep and save our attractiveness, we need also to work on the inland transport to be able to offer good road connection, good rail connection, good river connection. When you use massification, trains for instance, it allows you at the same price to go further, because of course it's a lot of fixed cost, so short distance is not very competitive, but when you go further, you can go, for the same price you can go further. So it's a matter of interland expansion for us. We can go and capture and get some goods all over France if we manage to connect France and even beyond our borders. It's also a matter of export. When you are a cereal company and you want to export, if most of your costs are inland, then you are not able to export very far, because the overall cost of maritime plus inland will be too expensive. So it's also a matter of cost. Of course, it's a matter of decarbonization. If we are not able to offer decarbonized supply chain in this era of non-financial reports, every company has to do non-financial reports. It even becomes mandatory in some countries. If we're not able to do it, we will be bypassed, simply. And it's a matter of resilience, I would say also, because it's a way to spread the risk between different modes. You don't put all your eggs in the same basket, as we say in France. And also, when you have a strong connection with public plus private investment, for instance, Medlog and MEC are investing massively in Le Havre, they are also supporting a traffic risk and the commercial risk. So we are expecting them to use our port. And so we think that our port will be more resilient in the future to the volatility of the market, because some private stakeholders have assets to use to make them run. So it's why it's important for us.
Thank you, Pierre. Right, ladies and gentlemen, you have our panelists. They've made their opening remarks. So now is a very good opportunity to ask this particular Brains Trust any questions that you have, maybe on supply chain excellence, maybe on something completely different. Who knows? They're open for everything. So has anyone got any questions to start with? Otherwise, I will continue down my merry road of asking my own questions. So. We have one from a gentleman at the back there.
Okay, it's John Fossey, World Cargo News. Yes, the session's about supply chain excellence, but I'd like to ask all the panelists about what companies need to do to make supply chains more sustainable.
That's a very good question, and I think Pierre mentioned about decarbonisation, but I have to say that throughout the day, sustainability has been sort of pushed off the headlines by many of the other things going off around in the world. So this is a great opportunity to put it back front and central. So maybe, I don't know, Pierre, shall we start with you? And then we'll work our way down.
I would say, first of all, I will defend my business. Multimodality is maybe the first act of decarbonization. So when you choose rail or barge, of course, it's less CO2 in the air. So it's the first. And then once you choose a massification, rail, barge, you can also accompany the decarbonization of this mode. And we are doing it at Aropaport. We are deploying electrical station to charge the barge. So when they are stopped, they don't use small motors. I don't know how to say it in English properly, but so they use the current electricity and they don't pollute all the area. So we have now a full network of electrical stations to charge the barge when they are stopped. And that's why we say we are a logistic corridor, but we're also a green corridor because we offer good rail connection and, of course, a large barge connection, and we make it more green. We're also thinking of multi-energy stations to accompany the change from diesel to other fuels, green fuels. So we launched some project to welcome some private stakeholders who will be okay to develop some multi-energy stations. So that's how we do it. But the first act is first to move from road to rail or barge.
And what role is the French government or the municipal government in Paris playing in that process?
Yeah, Aropaport is a publicly held company, so I belong also to the. I'm under the authority of the Minister of Transport, but of course they play a large role because they have subsidies, incentives to support both cargo owners or freight forwarders or transport operators also. And for instance, in France, when you decide to use rail or barge, every time you make a move with a container, you have the right to get a little bit of money, 23 euros per move, to transport your container with rail or barge. So of course there are subsidies. They also support the investment. We have a co-finance investment with the state and the regions. So we have a pre-annual investment program with region Normandy, region Île-de-France, which is Paris region. The state also brings a bit of money. We do it also. And so it's also an important lever to finance the investment, which will enhance our network, more rail, more barge, more platform, more multimodal platform, but also make it more green, more multi-energy station, more electrical station, all these kind of things.
Thank you. Peter, coming on to you, the Asia-Pacific region has sort of historically been seen as an area where sustainability doesn't actually play as important a role as many people it should do. But that's changing, would you say?
Yeah, I think that definitely is changing. To talk about my example from my company, we are basically a manufacturing company. Packaging solutions, as you know, we use a lot of raw materials, but 70 to 80% of the material we use are recycled, right? And our number one priority is sustainable supply chain, which means that whatever vehicle we use, they're all electric vehicles. And in the ocean freight perspective, we try to work with carriers who are very upfront in terms of the green fuel they use, whether it's LNG or methanol. All these, both on the upstream and downstream, we make sure that the supply chain is able to provide a solution for us which is less discriminatory to the environment, but more allow us to do lower carbon footprint contribution to the environment. So from a shipper's perspective, we do all methods for us, both in upstream and downstream, to make sure we adopt greener fuels, we adopt greener solutions to bring our carbon footprint to the company, right, to the organization. Number two, we also have very key KPIs that we follow, and we use this KPI to promote to our end customers and also to our regulatory bodies. All this, in a nutshell, allows us to become more greener environment. That's how, from a shipper's perspective. But from an Asia perspective, one thing that we're struggling is this. If you want to adopt a very green approach, it's going to be very costly. On the other hand, we also want to reduce your costs. So we need to create a balance between how you're going to provide a supply chain which is cost effective at the same time is able to provide low carbon footprint in the world. So that's a struggle that many of us are facing at the moment. There's no clear solution on that. It depends on the company's strategy.
And putting your 3PL, forwarder, or whatever hat on, Bjorn, what's the role?
Peter stole a lot of what I was about to say, right? There are two levels in the supply chain, and one of them you can control as a shipper, and one of them you can't. If you look at the big service providers and the dates they're forecasting for when they'll be carbon neutral, the good rule of thumb, if you don't know yet when they've forecasted it or what they will forecast, is the current estimated retirement date of the CEO plus 5 years. You go and check it. It's uncanny, okay? Long enough that he tried, but didn't quite make it, or she, all right? We are also seeing just in the last 6 months how a lot of them have rolled back the promises that they made before. Some of them because, like Maersk, they courageously and really commendably invested in a whole new technology only to find that the fuel is not available. And it won't be available because there's no demand, therefore there's no supply, and they themselves weren't able to generate the demand. So we're left to, and by the way, now a lot of them have picked up on LNG instead, a technology that 2 years ago they shunned. It was a bridging fuel. Nobody really wanted it because we all know that the dirty little secret of LNG is that it pokes even larger holes in the atmosphere than the CO2 does through the release of methane. So we're kind of really stuck for solutions coming out of carriers. Let's just be honest about it. Which, as a shipper and as a 3PL, leaves us with the part of the sustainability initiatives that we can control, which, as Peter says, is look inward in your supply chain. Look to returnable packaging. Look to placing demands, mandates on suppliers for how they need to deliver real, tangible measures. But when it comes to sustainability in transportation, especially if it's driven by fuel, I don't see any solution to it other than regulation. It's a sad fact that, and I remember at a different conference in Amsterdam last year, the gentleman from Maersk was sat there saying, and some of our shippers are paying, $20 extra per container or $200 per shipment or whatever for us to sail on methane. And I'm like, okay, and I asked the question, and I got the honest answer right. The question is this: okay, great, your name is Unilever. You sign up with Maersk or with CMA or whoever you sign up with to pay them $25 or $100 more per container, knowing that you can now go home and polish your halo because your cargo is riding on methane. Terrific. What's your CEO going to say when he finds out that Procter & Gamble is getting a free ride, that they're not paying the extra $200? How long do you think your CEO really is going to let you pay? And what are you going to do when Unilever comes back and says, well, we can't do this anymore because we're being rendered incompetitive? And he said, well, then we probably have to look at stopping the program, right? Because the carriers can't carry these costs by themselves. Only regulatory initiatives, in my opinion, mandates will force a change in shipper behavior. And it is to be hoped that if everybody was forced to ride only on green fuel, that the cost for everyone of that green fuel would come down. But looking inward in your supply chain, for my money, is, or in your operations as a 3PL or as a port operator, looking inward in your operations is by far the most bang for the buck in terms of saving the planet. While, to Peter's point, caught between that rock and a hard place of we could go 100% green tomorrow and we'd be bankrupt the next day because we'd be uncompetitive. And you got to find that balance somewhere. I don't know that it's a very optimistic answer, but at least it's an honest one.
Okay, well, let's run with that one before we come to James. Let's do we think it's politically acceptable in the economic environment that we're in for there to be a sustainability carbon surcharge? So I'm going to ask the audience now. So would you, as a shipper, be prepared to pay a surcharge, even if you knew that that was possibly going to make your goods uncompetitive? So hands up, who think that's a price worth paying? Comments, Bjorn?
I wouldn't.
No. Okay, fine. Very interesting. There we go. All right, let's come to James. And I'm going to broaden out this.
I wouldn't, and I don't think we should. We shouldn't. We shouldn't have to, because we should all have to pay. The minute we all have to pay, everyone pays. We saw that in the very low sulfur fuel mandate, for example, from the IMO. Everybody pays. It can be done. We've seen it with the special exclusion zones. All of a sudden, everybody pays because they have no choice. You can then argue that some shippers say, okay, we'll pay that, but we are particularly savvy at negotiating, so we'll want a corresponding decrease in the underlying base freight rate. Okay, fair enough, but everybody's paying the same charge. Everybody's quite literally in the same boat. There will always be people who, by virtue of their scale or their negotiating prowess, can get a better deal than the next guy. Fair enough. But at least we're all starting from the same page. This is a charge. It's there. It cannot be negotiated away. And then the only question that remains is that ever going to happen? Maybe. I don't know. It should. And it's the only way we're ever going to get anywhere near an acceptable adoption rate.
All right, just before we come to James, I just want to broaden out that question in terms of what does supply chain excellence actually look like? Because we've, thanks to John, we brought up this sustainability issue. That's obviously a very important part of having an excellent supply chain. I'll give you a plug for my book, The Good Supply Chain. There are three pillars. There's the profitability side. You need your supply chain to be profitable. You need it to be environmentally friendly. You need it to be ethical. And without one of those three legs on that stool, the whole thing falls to pieces. So when we've talked about supply chain excellence so far, we've been really, I think, thinking about inventory and trade policies and so on. So in your view, what is an excellent supply chain?
Well, it certainly should include sustainability factors, but you've got to make a profit to make a mess in the first place, really. Otherwise, you're not going to go out of business. So I certainly accept the reality that, and you made the point in your opening, the whole green agenda has just been completely swamped by the upheavals in trade completely, hasn't it? And it's one of the most significant regulatory developments made this year, just almost passed unnoticed, because the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, did actually agree the global regulatory framework that Bjorn was talking about that would be necessary for everyone to step forward and to start to address this issue and pick up these costs. Now, it's still got a few regulatory hurdles to go through before it becomes actual law. There were plenty of states in the IMO that objected to it, so it may not make it over the finishing line. And just to give you a flavour of that, the United States delegation stood up halfway through the meeting and walked out and would have nothing to do with it. So although it was much heralded as the first big global agreement on addressing the sustainability of shipping, it's still quite fragile and it may not yet make it. But it shows how far behind, if you like, the greening of maritime supply chains is, because what's going through now is pretty much what the rest of commerce was experiencing 10 years ago in terms of carbon trading and cap and trade emission schemes, which is effectively the system that the IMO looked to be adopting. So yes, definitely sustainability, but come back to where we started. Right at the moment, the question is, what's our current trade patterns going to look like this time next year? Will we continue to still be importing stuff from the other side of the world? And again, with various statements of intent made by very influential people, that's now a debatable question. And one of the most significant ways that shippers can reduce their carbon footprint is actually to shorten the length of the supply chain. Just simply do not move the goods as far as you do at the moment. Or as often. So there are those trading factors rather than the logistic factors. They're the levers that shippers are able to pull. And of course there was, and still is, a great debate about the ethics of globalization because of the impact it has on pollution levels and on carbon emissions. So it's all about priorities on the day, isn't it, John? At the moment, I think all of the shippers that I speak to are just focused on getting to the end of the week, especially if you're in the United States. It's very, very near term. You're not going to be measured at this point in time on the environmental footprint and your Scope 3 emissions account, and you're just going to be measured on whether you've actually got goods in, something approaching the budget that you were set and in the right place and at the right time. So this has shifted the focus. It's brought it back to the absolute essentials. And right at the moment, supply chain excellence is all about just getting the stuff into where it's needed at the right time and somewhere close to the right price. And that right at the moment is not easy. So we can't even do 101, never mind get into saving the planet. It's really, really brought it back to basics.
Great. Does that answer your question, John? Scribbling down, yeah, we've got enough there.
So can I just add to that, right?
Sure.
What
Yeah, Peter.
you just mentioned, I think it's very true, right? Because at the end of the day, my boss is going to measure what is the cost advantage I had in terms of procuring the rates, right? He's not going to measure me on how much CO2 I save, right? He's going to measure that. End of the day, I need to get the best rate in the market. I need to have the space. I have to create a reliable supply chain so that my goods, my raw materials on finished goods go to the market he wants. He's not going to measure me on the CO2. Yes, CO2 is important for the company as a whole. But when you look at individual perspective, individual practitioners, the role they do, they have different objectives. Objective is to make sure their cost is effective, they get the best cost, make sure the cargoes, they get the containers, they got a space. So everybody is measuring different KPI. So therefore, in current supply chain, you talk about supply chain excellence, especially in the ocean freight, it's all about cost competitiveness, reliability, and more importantly, making sure the end-to-end works. That's the way supply chain excellence is in today's world.
If I can continue the cynical streak that I seem to be adopting in this panel, we get rewarded for what can be measured, and CO2 footprint cannot. I don't know any company that's in all seriousness measuring people on whether they change the CO2 footprint in shipping. I'll tell you why. When I was with Sea Intelligence, we conducted a very unpopular exercise. We did that every year. Went to every single ocean carrier's website, found their CO2 calculator. And then we punched in a shipment, a dummy shipment. And of course, we went by alliances as well. With every single carrier's CO2 calculation, we got wildly different CO2 emission calculations on identical shipments. The carriers can't even agree how far in nautical miles the distance is between two ports. They can't agree within alliances on what the CO2 footprint is of a similar sized container that travels on the exact same ship from the exact same point to the exact same port. Back in the day when it was 2M, Maersk and MSC were sailing together, the only thing you had to do to reduce your CO2 footprint on a shipment from Shanghai to Long Beach was to ship it in a yellow container instead of a blue one. It's the color of a container that determines your CO2 footprint. If you sent the same shipment with OOCL, the nautical miles that it would travel between Shanghai and Long Beach was double the distance that it would have traveled on a Maersk ship, even though both travel in roughly a straight line following the curvature of the Earth. We have such a long way to go before we can measure accurately what this impact is. And that's not to say that we should stop attempting to measure it, but we need a much more unified global standard enforced so that we can measure on a like for like. And until we have that, I think a lot of purchasing managers have become very cynical, and you can't blame them based on studies like the one we conducted. You can't blame them for being cynical. I can meet my KPI tomorrow, I just have to use a different carrier, even though they're actually on the same ship. Makes no sense to me. But I think the question is very pertinent when you say how to achieve excellence in supply chain. I don't believe that there is such a thing as an excellent supply chain. I think it's, first of all, very industry specific, in some cases very sector specific within that industry. I think an excellent supply chain in an automotive manufacturer looks very different from an excellent supply chain for a supermarket retailer. Looks very different to the perfect supply chain if you're a high-end electronics manufacturer. So I think, and I don't mean to belittle this panel, right? But the question is too broad to answer. What we have to ask ourselves is, within our segment, within our industry, within our little sector, what is best practice and how do we make that even better, right? So we benchmark ourselves against our peers within that sector. And the fundamental questions you have to answer when you define what is excellent is, am I talking about a resilient supply chain, the word Peter used, or am I talking about an agile supply chain? Or am I talking about both? Or do I subscribe to the notion that you can't have both? Because agility implies nimbleness and you can switch around very quickly. Resilience implies, in supply chains, resilience means inventory. You want a resilient supply chain, one that delivers on the textbook example of supply chain, on time, in full, every time, with lowest possible inventory, lowest possible cost. I think those days are gone. You're not going to have that supply chain anymore. In the age of what some people have called perma-crisis that we find ourselves in now, I don't think you'll ever get to that goal. So you've got to first choose. Do I want to be resilient? I'm sorry, but you're going to have to put some inventory down, to your point, right? Do you want to be agile? I'd say you should probably go for agile more than resilient. Agile basically means risk diversification, all right? So the ability to switch very quickly in the face of almost anything that hits you. In order to do that, you're going to have to diversify your risk. If you're in ocean shipping, that means you're probably going to have to use as many carriers as you can, or rather you've at least got to be using all of the alliances and some of the independents that exist in the world. If you're in air freight, you'll probably want to work with 2 or 3 freight forwarders that use different gateways, and preferably some that have their own planes as well, and some that only use charters. These are all very doable, and that's how you build agility. But by doing that, you're also missing out on your opportunity to centralize and build inventory. So you see what I mean? The two, they're not entirely mutually exclusive, but they are damn difficult to marry into a perfect supply chain. I don't know anybody who's done it. So for me, an excellent supply chain is agile and nimble. It rolls with the punches, it shifts, it's able to move very quickly. That goes all the way back to your supplier strategy. Where do I source from? Is it China? Is it China +1? Is it China +2? I'm seeing people now thinking it's 2 plus China, meaning I'm going to move, not keep my bulk in China and move some of it to 2 other countries. I'm going to move bulk of it to 2 other countries and keep a little bit in China. But your mileage may vary depending on what industry you're in, right? And where your suppliers are even located. Can you even find alternative suppliers in a different location, right? So it's a super complex question, but for my money, I'll take agility any day, and that means spreading the risk, diversifying your supplier portfolio.
Okay, let's come to James, and then maybe Pierre, you could share some thoughts. So James first.
Well, just to give a heads up, really, because final word on the green issues, and that word is Zemba. So there has been a collective of large shippers, mainly, and a few forwarders who have worked together with the Aspen Institute in the US to actually pool their purchasing power in container shipping, and they issued, I think it was the second tender at the end of last year, which closed in February, so just ahead of all the tariff turmoil, where these shippers went to the market and invited tenders from container shipping lines to quote for the delivery of net zero shipping. So in other words, here's some extra money on the table to pay for the premium for the zero carbon fuels. Come and show us what you've got. Now, as I say, that tender closed at the beginning of February, and I think the results of that were due in a few weeks' time, middle of the year, with the actual public announcements due in October. Now, I don't know whether that has survived everything that's happened in between, especially as the dominant voices in that group were US importers. But that will actually give us our first real market test of the willingness to pay the premium that Bjorn is talking about, and the willingness of container shipping lines to step forward and actually bid for that kind of work. So it's probably all going to get lost in the noise of July the 9th and August the 10th now, but that was a really big step forward in that direction.
So Pierre, let's come to you and your thoughts about excellence. Obviously, you as a port operator authority have a different role in the supply chain, but you still have some levers, don't you, in which to, I suppose, pull to influence the logistics provider, whether it's rail or whatever.
Yes, of course, to connect with what has been said before, of course, the cost is a major indicator and will define the choice of a cargo owner or a freight forwarder, if he will use road, rail, barge, or whatever. But you have to consider also the indirect cost or advantages of alternative modes. For instance, if you go from Le Havre to Paris, the price of road and barge is almost the same if you look at the receipt. So why would I change from road to barge if it's the same price? But if you take into consideration that the barge itself is a floating stock, so it will allow you not to rent extra meter squares at high peak season. If you consider that you will have free time stocking in our river port, if you consider that you have specific customs procedures that allows you to delay your tax payment by 90 days, if you use a barge, which doesn't exist with road, and it has a huge impact on your cash flow. All this has also to be taken into consideration. So the thing is, you just not to take only into consideration the receipt that has been proposed by your freight forwarder, but to see all the global direct and indirect cost that you will have, or advantages. That would be the first thing, and it's our role as a port and as a corridor port to explain this, why you should use as a corridor. This is the first thing, and I think also when we talk about agility, using the best mode is a way to be agile, but also using the best immaterial procedures is a way to be agile. It's not only a question of modes and material moves, it's also a question of customs, controls, all these kind of things have a huge impact on the supply chain. Another thing that say Peter is end-to-end, very important for us. As a port, people are just passing by. Goods are just passing by. So we could think that we don't look at what is happening beyond us, but actually not. One of my role is to securize the end-to-end. So we're continuously speaking with the rail infrastructure manager, for instance, to ensure that we have sufficient slots, train pass capacity we make space for freight because we have also passengers, we have works on the rail tracks. So we need to make space to say, okay, guys, we need a bit of space for our trains. And even we are not a rail infrastructure manager, we have our own rail tracks, but then on the long range, it should be not our business, but actually it is our business. So, and the state, you talk about the state, the minister is a regulator in this case. And we're also supporting the creation of new dry ports, multimodal terminals. So we have shares in some dry ports. We are investigating some new places where new dry ports could be created. And so we want to be sure that when you arrive in the port, you can get out of the port, you can go on the river or on the rail tracks, and you have sufficient space to move your goods and sufficient capacity. And then when you get to this dry port also, there is some place to receive your goods and to handle it.
Thank you very much. We have plenty of time left. We have a quarter an hour. So are there any more questions from the floor before I change tack in our excellence? None that I can see at the moment. I am hidden away over here, but I think we're fine. So we have one on the far right hand side.
Thank you. Gavin Van Maal from the Lodestar. Slightly off the topic of the panel discussion, but I just wondered what outlook the panelists have for the Asia-Europe peak season this year, what their view of how it's going to develop and capacity and rates, therefore, so on. Thank you. Sorry for being off topic, but I thought I'd take the opportunity while you're all there together.
No problem, Gavin. I'll take that, right? Okay. One of the things I was so surprised about Asia-Europe this time around is that Europe was facing a lot of port congestions, right? Antwerp, Rotterdam, tremendous port congestions. And that trickled down to Singapore. Singapore also faces port congestions. Not because PSA Singapore port is unproductive, but because of the bunching of vessels coming into Singapore. Despite that, the North Europe rates, Asia to North Europe, were still climbing, but they stumble, they stabilize. But Asia to West Med increased tremendously because what happened was when the US implemented the tariff, especially on China, the capacity was pulled out from Asia Trans-Pacific trade to Asia-Europe. About 17% capacity was pulled out. So there was huge capacity in Asia to Europe. But now when they provided a window for China, so they pulled back the capacity from Asia-Europe into Trans-Pacific trade. Therefore, the rates come down. So currently, the way you see is that for Asia-Europe, the rate have stabilized. Asia-Med is still very strong because the capacity is still very limited. My outlook for the rest of the year is the following. Carriers are going to implement a PSS sometime in early July. We also haven't seen the summer cargoes moving from Asia to Europe yet. So to put next together again, I would say that since there's capacity reduction to Asia-Europe, especially North Europe, number two, there's still ongoing port congestion. I will see the rates, especially to West Med, continue to rise, but for Asia to North Europe, it will stabilize. That's my outlook for the rest of the year.
Anybody else have a view on this one?
Okay. I'm 100% aligned.
Yeah.
So first prediction is that will be the Asia-Europe via the Cape of Good Hope trade you're talking about.
Definitely.
So whereas that might have been a 50-50 call 7 days ago, I think it's a ranking certainty now. So we're not going to see a return to the Red Sea as was being debated. So that means, does it not? And again, this was featuring in the presentations this morning about the absorption of capacity. And those 70-odd ships, which was the last calculation we made, were sort of soaked up into servicing and providing the frequency of service when those diversions were put in. That will stay in place. I would imagine that given all the turmoil, the shipping lines will be looking just to deliver that peak season as booked, as close as they can. Just to try to stay and get some kind of baseline to see how they're going to go into the negotiation seasons for 25 into 26. But I think back to the points that we were making just now about whether you have an agile or an excellent supply chain, I think we're at the point where we can't rely on the past as being a good guide to the future. I would imagine in future presentations, so what we might be talking about this time next year, instead of the dotted lines we've seen on the chart, we're going to start to see those sorts of graphs that central banks used to deliver for the forecast of inflation, where, you know, thick solid lines when the data's been reported, but then this great spread of possibilities, because that's the reality. That's what the future looks like now. And therefore, how do you manage that as a supply chain manager? How do you plan and equip for that? You need to put into the team the skills to be able to manage that degree of uncertainty, because it's not just a trend based on the previous 3, 4, 5 months or 3, 4, 5 years. The whole point is it's so uncertain now. Therefore, you need different skills, you need different connections, you need different sources of information in order to have a best shot at trying to predict what you will be doing. And that's the challenge. We just don't know anymore. So we're into the art of prediction in very, very uncertain times.
So does that mean that everything that we usually talk in terms of visibility and data, is that, you know, can that be torn up for the time being? You know, is it just a fool's game to even be trying to think what's the market's going to be like in a year?
Yeah, right at the moment, until we get the other side of July 9 and August 12, yes, we might not have any trade at all. You're not going to get a lot of trade at 145% tariffs, which, if you like, is where they started from. There may be grounds for optimism, but it could go back to that. It could be worse. At the moment, and again, this is the issue, we don't know. You can't plan in that level of uncertainty. Therefore, the advice is start to think in your recruitment and in your skilling of your teams, a whole different range of skills and competencies you're going to need to be able to manage that. Because it's not just steadily continuing a contract that you've had with a logistics provider or a carrier, you know, just reiterating it and renewing it year after year, you know, usual as usual. It's a whole different ballgame.
Let's come to you, Bjorn, because I think that was a very good question. What are we going to be talking about in a year's time at this event? Because I don't know, if we'd have had this event last year, would we have been talking about trade, tariffs? You know, so what are we going to be talking about in a year's time?
Well, a year ago, we'd have been talking about the impending reopening of the Suez Passage, and that's what everybody was fearing or hoping. I think we'll be talking about it next year as well. And I'm not entirely convinced, there's that cynic again, I'm not entirely convinced that Europe really wants the Suez Canal to open up again, or that the shipping community at large wants it to open like a Big Bang kind of thing. The shipping lines certainly don't, because the rates will at some point fall through the floor, right, as massive new capacity, which is undeployable on any other trade by virtue of its size, comes in. I want to sound a word of warning here for those who hope that they would wake up tomorrow to the news that Suez has reopened, that we all understand that when Suez reopens, as it inevitably will at some point, will precipitate 3 months of utter chaos in the Europe and Mediterranean supply chains, with a dramatic spillover effect into Asia. Why? Because once that memo is issued or the telex goes to the vessels, Suez is open, the pool is open, turn right, don't turn left when you get to Africa. The vessels that get the memo in time to make the right-hand turn will now arrive in Europe ahead of the vessels that were round about the Cape of Good Hope when the telex came out. And thus, those vessels that turned right will overtake the vessels that turned left. That will, in and of itself, in any supply chain that relies on, for example, sequencing and order sequencing, precipitate absolute chaos. Any factory will now, that with limited warehouse space, will now start receiving goods that they didn't need and didn't have room for until 2 weeks later. massive congestion across every European major gateway port will ensue. There won't be enough trucks to clear. The containers will be held for a long time by the importers to calibrate or recalibrate for that, reversion in ETAs. That means the equipment won't come back to the ports in a reasonable time, the 3 or 4 days that they normally do. If they try, the ports will be utterly congested and unable to receive the equipment, which means very shortly thereafter, with about a 3-week delay, you will incur a situation of massive equipment shortages across Asia. And we know what happens to ocean shipping when equipment is short in Asia. We can keep painting this picture, but I'm pretty sure you get it now.
Yeah, I think we've all got there.
in terms of reopening Suez, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I think what you should wish for is for Suez to be sort of gradually reopened by a few intrepid souls, that and that you have a relatively managed transition. Personally, I don't think we'll see it this year, which means we might well be talking about it. Either we'll be talking about when it will reopen, or we'll be talking about the mess that occurred and whether we were all right about the mess. Hopefully, tariffs will have stabilized in a year. Hopefully, I actually think they will. But will we have an entirely new geopolitical situation as we seem to get a new one handed to us every month? And it's not just about the US, it's about the Middle East. It could be the Strait of Hormuz. It could be something blowing up in Asia. With Taiwan, we don't know, right? And that goes back to what John is saying. As I said before, we're living in a perma-crisis, and as logisticians, it behooves us to start thinking very, very differently. You could almost argue that a bunch of 50-plus-year-old people up here are not the right people to teach you about how to achieve excellence in supply chain, because we're apt to try and teach you how to return to something that used to be but never will be again. So go and hire people who have a very different skill set, who think very differently about supply chains, and ask yourself which kind of supply chain you want out of the 2 or 3 you can have, because you can't have all 3, not in a perma-crisis state.
Pierre, let's come to you next for I'm guessing a less than 50-year-old perspective.
Sorry.
And then Peter, I'm going to let you wrap up in a very positive Asia-Pacific sort of way. Yeah, to leave us all feeling good about life. So Pierre, we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left, so go for it.
Yeah, no, just to react to what I've been said, I'm 38 years old for information. No, but talking about congestion, it's an interesting topic, because when we talk about congestion, Peter say Singapore is facing congestion, Rotterdam, wherever. We are talking about ports, of course, which is a major bottleneck. Of course, we can consider maritime means, the way, the capacity we have to handle ships, of course, but inland transport is another way to be congested if you are not prepared. If you rely too much on roads, for instance, you can have some congestion issues on a regular basis. And then when you have shocks, important shocks, if you don't have multiple solutions, you are not able to face these conditions. So it's actually what we are working on, to have a diversity of solutions to offer to answer to these shocks. Of course, next year, I don't know what will be the main topic, because I wouldn't bet €1 on what will be the topic, but we just want to ensure, our job is to ensure that whatever happens, we will find an efficient solution for your inland transport. As I said, it can be very hard solutions like trains, barges, extra physical moves of goods, but we also have some. We are investigating new technologies, IT, AI, estimated time of arrival for ships, but also for barge in the future, to be able to anticipate this move, to have a record of what happened in the past year when you are facing a congestion situation. And we hope that these new tools, these new technologies will also help us to face this congestion.
Fantastic. Right, it's over to you now, Peter, to leave us skipping out of here to the coffee break.
Right, just two things on my side. First of all, the wonderful question to ask, what are we going to discuss next time around? I attended a conference before I came here. It's a logistics conference in Singapore. The question was posed to all the audience. Will we still be talking about US tariff in December? 90% of the time say that no, they will not be talking about US tariff because there are other disruptions that will come along, like what John just mentioned, Suez Canal opening, what's the implication? South China Sea, what's the implication? So disruption will be there, but we will not be talking about US tariff down the road. What we should be talking about is the human resource, which I'm very, very concerned with. Because in today's world, especially the younger generation, they are not used to supply chain, like in this morning's conference. Supply chain is not a sexy industry to be with, especially young people. There are some young people over there, I think they will concur with me. So how do you, Amy is there, how do you attract young people to the industry? All those experience we have, we don't put in book. Maybe John, you put in the book, but all of us, we put it all here. We don't publicize the book. So therefore, my biggest question down the road is, how do you develop people to analyze, to anticipate and be adaptable to manage disruptions? That is the key topic we're discussing down the road. That's the first point. Number two, on the optimism of Asia, right? Okay, it's very important for me, right? So at the end of the day, I think the US tariff has been a benefit or a blessing in disguise for Asia because we started to look more inward and use China as our anchor point. When the US government were talking about what are the tariff levels we need to put in, what was the Chinese government doing? The Chinese government were inviting the industry captains to the country to talk about business. And all the countries in Asia, they have their bilateral discussion with the US. At the same time, they're doing bilateral relationship with one of them to create a reduced barrier environment. For example, ASEAN, the countries of 10 countries, about 650 million people, we are developing a multilateral cooperation of reducing the tariff. So therefore, we see so much opportunities in Asia. We do not worry about what's happening to the US. US can be a big market, but it's not the only market for us. That's why you can see many shippers or freight forwarders are developing the business from Asia to India subcontinent, Asia to Middle East, to Africa, and even to Latin America. I give you a simple example, right? When Vietnam was imposed the steel tariff by the US, what the Vietnamese did, they basically moved the cargo from Vietnam to Australia because Australia was in huge demand for steel. So that's what Asians do. They look for resourcefulness. They look for avenues for them to move their cargoes. They don't depend purely on the US. So in a nutshell, there's so much opportunities in Asia. The future is bright for Asia, not only because of China itself, but also for India subcontinent and also South Asia countries.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I will call a halt to today. So I wonder if you can show your appreciation to what's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much indeed. And just one last message from me, just leading on from Peter's point in terms of the book. Just like to say, if you'd like to have a free copy of the latest book, which I have to say, last time round I forgot to say, was also co-authored by Julia Swales, who's also here, also signing books as well, then I think it's available just at the back table. So thank you very much indeed, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.